So let's welcome Rick Doten up to the stage.
Thank you, everybody. Are we good? All right. Thank you so much for, if you don't know why I have this cruise director, just ask somebody at your table, because I have friends at every table that will tell you the answer to that. But so happy to talk about it, and I don't get to talk about cybersecurity for once. You know, this is a topic that's really important to me, and I'm just going to get right into it. But first, those of you know, where's my, did I switch to the thing yet? You've seen my face long enough. Where am I? There it is. Many of you know that I'm a yoga teacher, and so I like to start all my things. Let's sync up and take a couple breaths. So let's sit up in your chair, roll your shoulders back, open your chest. I want you to breathe in deeply through your nose, and then let it out through your mouth. One more time. Breathe in through your nose. Hold for a second. Breathe in a little more, and let it out through your mouth. And every time I do this, someone comes up afterwards like, oh my gosh, I feel so good after that. It was like, well, yeah, and most people are shallow breathers. And feel free to continue with these deep breaths for a couple more times as I tell you a story. In 1984, on my 16th birthday, first thing I did is I got up and I went to the DMV to get my driver's license. I'd already been driving for a couple of years. I already had a car, but I wanted to be legit. And I was there 5 minutes before. I made my mother's like, we're going to get there early. And I'm like, have my face against the glass, like, when are you opening up? Because I need to get this license. Because I went home, got in my car, and drove to the mall and applied for a job. At 16 years old, went to York Steakhouse, if anyone remembers York Steakhouse, as a dishwasher and a busboy. Two of my friends already worked there. Probably no surprise to those you know me. I worked in the theater during high school as a technician, built the sets, managed all the lights and the sound. And two of my friends there, and I was really excited to get a job, make some money so I can put it into my car, because I was really much into cars and making it more effective. So one of my friends who was there, who was one of the actors, we had shared a locker. And in that locker, we had a printed off script of Monty Python and the Holy Grail that we would read in between classes and memorize the whole thing. So when we're back at the dishwasher, we start quoting this stuff. Old woman, man, old man, I'm 37. I said, you don't look old, We started quoting that and driving people crazy, because then we'll talking the whole evening in a British accent and start doing these things. And so they started separating us, because you guys are just way too extra to be together. And then when I was with my friend, I didn't talk to anybody. I was very quiet. But what I did do is I looked at how we did things and wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. And so I made a more efficient way to load the dishwasher and run through, a more efficient way of how we run through the line, a more efficient way of all these things, because I pattern recognize, I'm seeing all these issues. I'm like, oh, 16-year-old me thought that I was smart, not realizing that I have really good pattern recognition and able to make more improvements in things. But at the detriment of that is no one wanted to be my friend, because I kept correcting them how to do things. Again, 16-year-old, I didn't do too much. And that was my first realization that I was a little different. And so we're talking about neurodivergent. And when people think about that, they usually start by saying, ASC, which is autism spectrum condition, or ADHD. It's actually lots of things. It's dyslexia, it's Tourette's, it is, bipolar sometimes fits into that. And there is a lot of, so this kind of area all kind of fits into neurodivergent. For most of my talk today, I'm really just talking about the ASC and ADHD side, though 80% or 60% of people with one comorbidity have another. And don't think I knew that word before I read it the first time and looked it up. It means that you have multiple conditions of these things. In fact, 40% of people with ADHD also have depression, and 50% also have anxiety. They kind of go together. And so why is this important for our industry? Because when I first started looking into this, and I've spent 25 years managing, ethical hackers from the late 90s to late 2000s, forensics people, incident response people, DBAs, all these, and I found that I had a really good knack through my pattern matching of understanding how to get them motivated and how to keep them successful in these people who think differently than your average bear. And when I started doing research in what neurodivergent, and there are some people that I'll kind of call out later who are neuroscientists on TikTok and on YouTube, that really are digging into it, because up until a few years ago, all the research on neurodiversity and particularly autism were on middle-class white boys. And so there's not about women, not about minorities, not about any other thing. And so, we didn't have a lot of information, but now there is. And we're getting a lot of great information. And what this helped me was be able to articulate the things that I've always known. Like in security, what do we always say? It's like we hire based on personality. It's like the aptitude and personality. I don't care where we went to school, don't care all these different things, but what is that personality type? What is that aptitude? That's what I'm going to explain today. And then also how to be able to manage these folks who will, again, think a little differently. This is not a condition to be fixed. It is just the way the mind works. And I'll talk a little bit more. But why is this important? Because when I first started looking at this, and I'm looking at different trends and things like that of different traits of how people are, which I'm going to go into, I said, I don't know anyone who's not this way. But we're in this industry, and everybody in this industry is somewhat this way. And let me make the first time, I'm going to say this probably 5 times today, is like the disclaimer that I'm not here to diagnose you. I'm not here for you to diagnose yourself. I'm not here. I'm just showing you different traits and commonalities of people who think this way, and how are different tips to be able to be effective and be able to move forward in your life. So just to kind of make sure that is there. So what are some of these attributes? So I talked before, excel at pattern matching. The other thing I want to say is usually I don't put that much words on my slide, but I know this is going to be recorded and I know it's going to be public. So I put more information so that you have this as a reference later, which will come in handy as I get a little further into it. We have an hour together, but I promise you it's going to go quickly and we'll be able to have a little discussion about it. So pattern matching, understanding with structured systems, attention to detail, and, learn things very fast. I don't remember which Marvel movie where the Hulk asked the other guy, the Iron Man guy, is like, hey, when did you become an expert in blah, 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 blah? He goes, last night. It was like the ability to pick up things based on pattern and learn things very quickly. So there is that 10,000 hour rule to be an expert. Doesn't necessarily apply to many neurodivergent people. And so one of the things that is a challenge is like these things sometimes contradict each other and sometimes they complement each other. And so passion and interest on certain things, and you can see we're determined and driven, keep working on problems, hyper-focus on a task, forget to eat and sleep. We've certainly all done that. And so the thing that I always like start off with, for those of you who've talked to me outside about this particular topic, is I said, in this range of different things, and honestly, time myopia or time blindness. How many people don't realize it's like when I'm estimating how long it's going to take, it's either like way too long or way too short. Or, be able to miss things because they don't realize that they get caught up on something. That's another one of these things. I'm very happy to see that this is getting more attention. So both the SANS Institutes have a neurodiversity summit, and then CyberMinds has things similarly. So we're now getting attention about this and recognizing it because, again, this is not a badge of shame or not a label. This is something that is just how the mind works. And we'll talk a little more about that. So different traits in, these kind of things is like how we cycle through. Because the thing that I always talk about is like, on one end, we have people who, like myself, thrive in chaos, happy to do multiple things at once, run forward with little information, fail quickly, figure it out as they go along. Great. And so those are in our industry, and he's not in the room today, but one of my friends, John up at Contour Brands, he says he finds that food service people have this mindset. And he finds himself like interviewing bartenders and wait staff because they're managing lots of things. We know something's going to go wrong. They're just going to recover from it and keep going and do it with a customer service perspective, right? On the other side are people, when we kind of go through some of these different things, we look at the differences between, there are people who are single-threaded, afraid to fail, very meticulous about every step they take, and will not make a step until they kind of figured out every single plan before they go forward, and that's fine. These people on the right make great incident responders, make great pen testers, make great wait staff. These people on the left make great forensics people, make great project managers, make great developers. It's fine. It's just, who was that? And so when we talk about personality type, it's like, okay, well, great. I want someone who's going to jump into the fray and figure out as you go along. and someone who may be, because I used to always say that, I ran ethical hacking teams for 10 years. I interviewed a lot of people a hell of a lot smarter than I am and with much better pedigrees. And I'm like, they can't do the job. And I couldn't articulate that. But this is why. Because they're on the other side, which is talking about, because you can alternate between the two, of course. They're on the other side, which is like, again, very academic, very want to know, like, what is the prior art of this? Where am I going to research this? Like, no, you just figure it out. That's how this works. And if you're not that mindset, then you're not going to be a good pen tester, and just kind of a thing. So I know the thing is way over there, so I need to like move my arm. So if you see me do like that, then that's why. So strive for efficiency in time, process, and movement. That's kind of what I do all the time. Start a task when they know exactly, steps for. So I kind of went through this. Again, this is written down for you. Questioning everything. We'll talk a little bit about like it helps when people know the why we're doing this kind of thing. The efficiency thing, no surprise to for those who know me, like 5 years ago, I was a bartender on the weekend on a dinner cruise on the Potomac River in Washington, D.C. before I moved down here 4 years ago. I always wanted to be a bartender, but I don't drink. And so I'm like, hey, people said, oh, you can't be a bartender if you don't drink. And I'm like, no. And I went to a bartending school who said, no, that's ridiculous. It's a formula. It's like baking. You don't have an opinion on it. You make it the way you make it. But I have the personality, as you can tell, to really want to do that. And so what I loved about it was this game theory of, okay, I have these 6 drinks to make, and I'm going to do this in the most efficient possible way and get them all done at the same time. And that was like how I loved it. And there were people who came in and didn't have that mindset. And I'm like, what do you mean? So again, leaning into the things that's a superpower of you or your partners or your kids or your coworkers or your staff. And remember that we can alternate between these two. I can be as completely chaotic as possible and run forward with little information, but I can make a plan. I make a plan to go this far, but then be able to wing it when I have to. These are things that are traits that are important to be able to manage. Because everyone kind of thinks, and when I talked about the spectrum, it's not like this, okay? Whether or not you have more neurons in the brain that are firing synapses is the thing that makes your mind that way. My mind is that I just happen to have more than that. It's not like, and the manifestation is the things I was talking about before is how is it related to the world. So the reality is it's really kind of this spectrum here, right? It's like, do you fidget and tics? Yes, I do. I poor contact? Yes, I do. Abnormal posture, which is like the neck leaning forward, social difficulty, anxiety, blah, 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 blah. It's these kinds of things. It's kind of understanding for yourself and for others, where does this fall? And that's fine. When I was running teams and I had folks that were, the best at hacking something and deconstructing something. And, my leadership is like, oh, well, Steve needs to learn how to brief the customer. I'm like, no, he doesn't. I'm going to keep him in the room. I'm going to feed him stuff. I'm going to make sure that nobody talks to him. And he's going to produce great things. And I can have somebody else take what he says and give it to the customer. I'm not going to put him into an uncomfortable situation with his high anxiety, and take away his hyper focus and then make him, uncomfortable so he's not as productive in the superpower that he has. And that's kind of like, again, the main theme I'll come back to. So the challenge is not just like dealing what's inside one's head. My favorite quote about being neurodivergent is your brain has a mind of its own because it's always thinking of something. And you may be just sitting here doing nothing, but your brain's going 100 miles an hour. And you're thinking of all these things and thinking about things you used to do and things that you could do. And, all these different things, like how I could have done something better or how I can do something better next time. But to society, it sometimes looks like you're not paying attention. My son is the same way, and I know that he can be, playing a game, watching something, listening at the same time. I can tell him, and I know he listened. But most people don't realize that, and that's the hyper-focus while doing multiple things. So we kind of go through that like nothing is ever right. It's like, well, Rick, you overshare too much. You're too enthusiastic. You spend too much time on that. You're too chatty. You're too loud. There we go. Too funny, have no sense of humor. It was like, well, who came up with what's normal, right? It was like there is kind of this range. Or some people have told me like, oh, well, you read too well, hyper-focused, blah, 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 blah. These are too direct and blunt. This is one, no filter, right? Because everything is kind of like, I'm telling you something, I don't understand the social cues that this might be uncomfortable. And so we kind of will do it. So there's a social aspect that if we kind of condition folks with this so that they have to mask. And so the masking portion is like, you start, and I certainly did this. So when I was in, when I moved for another job when I was 17 years old, working at Ruby Tuesdays, incidentally, as a cook. And keep in mind, like, I'm 16, 17, and I'm like working with folks that are 32 years old, have alimony payments and stuff like that. It was great education of what not to do. But I learned to like just shut my mouth and don't start talking so much. And so I was working this one shift by myself with a friend of mine. Well, not a friend of mine. Someone who I was not close to. Excuse me, Mona. And I didn't say a word for 2 hours. I just did the most efficient way possible of cutting a dice of tomatoes, slicing up things, putting things together, making something, all this stuff in the most efficient way possible. My main does. And then my friend came in. And like I said, Janet, who I was working with, I had not said a word the whole time. And so Steve comes in, and I like all of a sudden just like, let me tell you about this interview that I saw on MTV with AC/DC. They were talking about the film, and I'm just going on and on and on. And he's like, yeah, cool. Yeah. And she was like, what the hell happened to you? You have not said a word in 2 hours, and now you just go. And I said, because I'm comfortable with him. I know he's not going to judge me. He is like me. And so that comfortableness is another thing when I talk about how to help is kind of this mirroring, having people that's part of the community, which is so important thing. So you may not see that, but they're going 100 miles an hour. You may may be perfectionists. Some people are perfectionists is because their mind is going crazy. It's the only way that they can do this. This is me. Those of you who know me, I think I'm really good at staring people in the eye. What I trick, but it's not, I'm thinking in my head this exact thing. It's not natural. And what I learned in the 20s was is picking out eye color. And so I know the eye color of Sean has blue eyes, Mona has brown eyes, Ken has brown eyes. It's just one of those things. I'm looking at the eye color and I'm remembering that and I'm taking that information in while I'm doing it. And then I'm thinking these things. While I'm doing it. And I didn't realize that this was a thing that I had, but you kind of mask it by saying, oh, social norms require me to do this. And so I start doing this. And this is another important one is that, there's a frustration that's there. And I'll talk about a little tip on this. I mean, I'm only admiring the problem for the next 5 minutes, and then I will get to what we do about it. And so realizing that there are things that really hurt them hard, which is one of the things that I kind of talk about is not being too hard on them. Again, I ran pen test teams, and these folks, if they made a mistake, is I just come in and be like, okay, what are we doing? All right, cool. And oh, I thought you were going to yell at me about it. It's like, oh no, you're going to be much more hard on yourself than I will ever be. I'm not going to pile on top of that because that's going to spin up your anxiety if I do that. And so masking becomes something that we learn to do to kind of cope with society who doesn't understand us, which again, why community is so important. So what is the prevalence? And so worldwide, there's a 7.2% prevalence of ADHD and 1% of autistic. In the US, it's 8.1 and 2.8. And all of you are saying, that's way too low. There's no way it's that low. And that's true. As far as people who are diagnosed, there was a whole discussion of whether to diagnose and get the patch that says you are or not. And they're valuable. I am not technically diagnosed, so I am not in this list. And there's pluses and minuses for it, which is a whole other presentation. But, this is still a significant number. And so going back to my thing where I said, nobody I know who's not this way. I looked at things we have 1.2 million cybersecurity professionals, which is 0.35%. So if all of us are in this, then that makes sense. It's a big enough number that we all came to this because we understand patterns, we understand how these things work, we understand how to make things better, and security kind of fits into this, right? And so just want to kind of see where we are on this and what the real numbers were. Obviously these are a little bit low. People are masking, people are not discussing, and it's very much like being left-handed. So this is from 1900, very few, less than 4% of the people were left-handed. And then you get to 1945, and they're okay, now how come everyone all of a sudden started being left-handed? And those of us who know patterns are immediately say, oh, because my father was born in 1940, and he is left-handed. And he told me that he was one of the few people in his age that was allowed to be left-handed because they beat it out of them. It was like, oh, no, honey, you don't write with this hand, you write with this hand. It's like, well, this is harder. It's like, well, you're going to have to learn how to do it. So now you have a whole generation of, generations of people up until we kind of accepted left-handedness was a trait that is kind of born into you and not something to be, cured or medicated against or whatever, and let them be left-handed. I mean, still left-handed people are like, higher mortality rate, low mortality rate, whatever, just because the world's not made for left-handed people, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, but still, imagine how hard it was when you couldn't be that way because the world was not made for that. And so I think that this analogy is obviously to what we have. It's like there's a lot of people this way that we're still down here, not identifying, accepting, or letting people be who they are and identifying that. And hopefully in the next few years, this will be much more acceptable to be able to go through. So I said there was an 8.2 and a 2.7, and that there's also an overlap. And in the DSM-4, DSM-5, whatever we're up to now in psychology, there is a category for ADHD and there's a category for autism, and there is no category for both. But this very large number, and this is not an error, it is a very wide, it's 30 to 80, which is pretty much like anything, because we don't really know that are both, and they're ADHD, autistic and ADHD. I certainly am. And this is where you get really interesting with your abilities either contradict or complement each other. And so you're constantly like overstimulated or understimulated. So I'm always finicky or it's too loud. And so you'll see sometimes younger autistic people having headphones on to like block out the noise or have music playing so that they're always stimulated. You will rotate between social awkwardness and overly chattiness. This is absolutely me. I'm in a big group of people and I will just kind of sit against the wall, but everybody knows how chatty I am. It's like, there's no way in hell Rick is not like talking constantly. And it was like, well, you got to put a quarter in me first and then I'll start talking. And so, but this is what I kind of wrestle with. And then there was, hobbies. I went through every sport, every hobby. I was fortunate enough to have a family that supported me in this. Like I did archery, I did bowling, I did blah, 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 got all the equipment, got good at it because of good eye-hand coordination, pattern matching. And then I realized, I need to actually practice to get better. I'll move to the next thing. And that's the ADHD side, which is always thinking novelty. The explorer gene, as they call it in neuroscience. You're always looking for that. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. And different versions of your traits show up in different situations, and also they may change as you grow and you age. I was much more shy until I was like in my early 20s or mid 20s, and then I got very, very even more chatty publicly. And so these things can change. There was a study, going back in the history, and this is my last slide before I start talking about what we do about it. In 2016, University of York in the UK has this thing where they talk about going back tens of thousands of years and this kind of mutation in our brain that gives us more neurons that love pattern match and look at how things relate a lot better. This has been a social advantage. And so at some point, somebody's like, the sun does this, and if we grow our crops here, we'll be more effective. These animals go this way, and if we follow them, we're going to do that. There has been some little superpower person that comes in and figures out how we move this society forward and get better. And no one said that they were autistic. No one said because that word didn't exist. They happen to be the sage or whatever. And if you look at every single Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, whether it's an artist, whether it's a musician, whether it's a scientist, whether it's an inventor, congratulations, they were all neurodivergent. But we didn't have a label for that. But their mind was always thinking about patterns and how to make things better and how to improve things. And fortunately, they had the flexibility and support to be able to do something about it, and that's how we have improved our society over time. And so this kind of goes through that. And this particular paper talked about that. Okay, so now we get into what do we do about it. And so, all right, yeah, I'm good. 25 minutes in. I didn't want to admire the problem for too long. Manage energy, not time. This is the thing about like figure out when and where. So I had a guy when I was a CISO 10 years ago of a mid-sized company, my number 2 guy, Chris, was certainly like me, and he was a night owl, and that's fine. And so I said, just show up whenever you show up, because I know you're working till 4 a.m. at whatever and whatever. I was like, just let me know if you're going to be here for lunch, because I'll be really pissed if you don't show up and I miss lunch because we don't go together. Like, the only thing I care about. Everybody else is like, wow, Chris comes in late. It's like, no, he doesn't. He comes in when he's ready to work. He's managing the energy. I'm a morning person. I'm up at 6 a.m. I get all my good stuff done by 7:30. That's where Rick is most productive. And so, but my son, who's 27, he's a night owl. And so I call it like changing of the guard. So I come down this morning at 6 o'clock, and there is Max from the night before, still on Discord talking to friends of his and around the world. And I'm like, okay. And then he's going up to bed, and I'm starting my day, and we're changing of the guard. And so that's fine. He would never be successful if he had to get up at 7 a.m. and go to a job. And so, why are we making left-handed people try to write with their right hand? But think about like managing the energy periods, before or after. We're going to talk a little bit more about, different maladies in how to kind of lean into that. This will come into play again later. So splitting tasks and manageable increments. And this kind of like makes sense. It's like, yeah, we know that. But there's also like these short-term gains because, the ADHD side, we thrive on dopamine. And so doing something successfully gives a little dopamine hit, and then I want to do it again. And that's why some people like to have checklists. And I'll have in a couple slides, I'll have a list of apps that really, really are helpful in either defining what to do or give you a little checklist so you feel. That was when I was working at Ruby Tuesdays as a prep cook and as a line cook. I'm like, okay, we're making this, and I get to check off all these things when I complete it. Dopamine hit every time. I'm doing that. That's great. And so, when you find that, then great. And then use momentum. So sometimes like doing quick tasks, I remember the Franklin-Covey model of time management, where like this is important and this is quick, and then you kind of do the math of do these things first that are quick and less important than the real important things that take a long time. That kind of gives you that momentum. And so sometimes you have to prime the pump. Do something simple to be able to get started. And I do this all the time, when I'm helping my sons out. Body dumpling is the other thing I do all the time. Just having somebody sit in there with you. It's like, hey, I need to work on this, but I can't focus. Can you sit with me? I'm doing something else, but sitting next to Debbie here, and because she's here, I am feeling motivated because she's working and I'm working. That's why a lot of people go to coffee shops to work. It's like, okay, I can't work at home. I need energy to be able to help motivate me to work. So if you have somebody who like has a hard time getting started, I'm just going to sit next to you, and we're just going to do it, and that'll kind of like help them focus. Very, very, very common one. The reason, sometimes it's like there needs to be a why. It's like, what's the big picture? Why am I even doing this? Why did I have to take algebra? And so giving them that why, ahead of time to say, here's the big picture. Like, oh, okay, cool. Because if I just come in and bark an order at somebody and walk away, and they're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. I can think of 3 reasons why that happened, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, here's why we have to do it, and go that. Not everyone's that way. But there might be people who really just need a little more explanation. Years ago, I was working with somebody who, he didn't like to be barked at orders. So if I would said, Adam, go get me this thing, or Adam, do this other thing, he was like, what? What do you mean? What are you telling me to do that for? But if I say, hey, can you do me a favor? Yeah, what? Can you do this thing? Love to. Go ahead. Sometimes just a little bit of, giving a reason because they're doing it a favor or do this. And then this is another important one, is transitioning. My wife struggles with this, of like getting to go to do something, which is like, okay, I'm going to tell you a month and a half ahead of time, this is going to happen. And sometimes, people will freak out, like, oh, we're changing this, we're doing that. It's like, oh, I'm not ready for that. Understand that when you see people react that way, again, it's how their mind works, and they need to process and be ready to do that. And so make sure, and it could be as simple as making a phone call, like, okay, I have all my things together, I need to make sure I'm there, what's going to happen, go through my scripts and everything. And if you kind of, spring it on them, then they're all panicky because they're not prepared, because they're one of the other things that I'd mentioned earlier. And so understand and manage transition. So if there are people that you're dealing with, or yourself, that it's like aren't good at like twitching on the fly, then sit back and look, okay, what do I need to transition? What do I need to know to make me feel comfortable to be able to do this? And so it makes a really big difference in progress in that way. And there are tools for this. Here are some that are specifically like ADHD tools. Goblin Tools is kind of a fun one. So what it does is, kind of like ChatGPT, it says, I need to clean the bathroom, but I'm going to procrastinate on that because I'm thinking like, how am I going to do it? And that transition thing from cleaning it to not cleaning it to cleaning it. And so I need to get a little dopamine hit on it. So what Goblin Tools will do is say, how do I clean the bathroom? And it'll say, find the cleaning supplies, take everything off of the counter, wipe down the counter with this, and then you get a little checkbox. So you get that dopamine hit of checking these things out. It'll give you lists. And some of these do very similar things, but just giving this out. In this presentation, in the notes, I have the links to all of these. But that help you through this, depending on what it is that you need help with. Goblin Tools is like, I don't know where to start. Great. I'm going to give you the steps to do some very basic task. Great. Others, like 30-30, is like, I'm going to give you a timer. When my brother was in 4th grade, he's 5 years older than I am, the school called and says, hey, Dana is not doing his work. And she said, put on a timer for 4 minutes and he'll get it done. Is that sometimes you just need a timer. It's like, okay, I'm just going to work for 30 minutes on this. And then having that timer gives you the motivation and have the deadline and be able to focus and do these things. Again, everybody's going to be different. Find the one that works for you, and then maybe there's a tool to do that, and then you can kind of work through it. The stress response is another big thing. It may be from a transition. It may be from doing something that you haven't done. It may be from behavior. And the thing that this has really helped me because in working with people, because when I see someone start to spin up, because as I said, often like if you have ADHD, you may also have anxiety. And so it's like, oh my gosh, can't believe that. And I'm so stupid. And it's happened again. Well, if this happens, then this is going to affect this thing. And I can't do this if it happen. What if they're going to say about this? And you're spinning and spinning and spinning, and you're going through this crazy thing. But neurologically, it's only a 90-second hit. But then what happens is it extends because you start spinning up of thinking all these things. And so what I talk about, do I have a thing? Oh, okay, yep. So what I talk about is, when my sons were younger, I used to always say it's like de-escalate and redirect. And so the de-escalate happens after the 90 seconds. Let them go. They start spinning up. They're angry. It's like, it's great, work through it. I'm not going to tell you not to have this emotion. Go ahead and go through this. And then when the timer goes off for 90 seconds, okay, let me redirect you to something, or let me give you some positive feedback, or let me give you something like that. But let them go through this first before you start and let them know it's okay. Because what happens, and we did this as parents, when they were just like Max was playing a video game, and he's like, oh, this stupid thing, and he tossed this thing and everything. It was like, calm down, what are you doing? Stop it. Let them get through it. Only 90 seconds. And then de-escalate and redirect. And again, that can work for anything. I talked about earlier that, particularly in our industry, we hire for personality, which now we can articulate what that is, what kind of personality. There's actually a couple, the CATA, CATA, and some other tests that help identify where you are in whether you think fast, think slow, these kinds of things. But the problem is a lot of, and what I always say is when I'm hiring somebody, give me every resume of anyone who thinks they can do the job. I will filter through them. I don't want you to filter anything because we all know that HR is our limiting factor in getting people. My whole rant about there's 2 million unfilled cybersecurity positions. It's we don't have enough cybersecurity professionals. No, we don't have enough people that we accept into our program. The people have these mindsets, these waiters and these janitors and these bartenders who can do it, but we're never given the opportunity. Or these people who are over in audit or accounting or in some other, and are developers who feel intimidated about coming into our industry because I'm not good at math or I didn't go to STEM education or whatever, and feel like they don't have the opportunity or the right to be in it, but they have the right personality and mindset that we do. And so, but even those who do and are very successful in what they do, and I've had good friends of mine who are not good with interviews because sometimes you're too honest. And I haven't said, and so my friends who are recruiters, because I've told you this, right? That there are, it's like, hey, people like me are not going to exaggerate. They are going to, underplay what they do. They're not going to be confident in their abilities, even though they're going to be rock stars. They might be good at communicating or explaining something because they have this anxiety or don't know how to articulate, or they may be overstressed because they know that they're usually not doing good and they're starting to spin up. And they might be able to express themselves, but as well of the topic that they have. And then not to mention that, well, I'll save that for a minute. One thing in here is that, particularly in a big company like mine, HR wants to have a very subjective list. It's like, these are the questions you ask everybody, and you measure how well they answer the questions, and it's all very subjective. And we have the math to be able to have plausible deniability. We did it fair, and we weren't favorable in somebody. That's the worst thing in the world to us, because we don't understand. Because you're not getting how well do you handle things under pressure, how well do you do these things, how do you think. Those are not part of those questions. They're all very academic, and we don't get to really understand them, and so they don't do well in tests. So what I learned years ago when I was managing ethical hackers, my little trick was I did all the talking. No surprise. It's me, right? And so, but I would see what they reacted to. And so I'm like, yeah, it's like, here's the kind of things we're doing. We're doing this kind of thing, that we're using these tools, Nmap and all this stuff. We just script, and I see what they react to. And so they get excited about something like, okay, they know what I'm talking about. Or if I'm talking about a certain concept, and they kind of glaze over like, yeah, they don't know what they're talking about. And so I got really good at talking 80% of the time, which is easy for me to do, and just seeing how they react to different things to say, oh yeah, this person knows exactly what I'm talking about. They reacted for all the right things. They were excited about the things I said, and they clued in all this stuff, and they kind of got so moved to chime in and says, oh yeah, we did this. I'm like, great. Because I want to get them excited enough to really open up. Because if I give them tell me about your experience in this and what tools you have and your level of experience in those tools. Well, which ones are you talking about? Then all the whys come in. Well, I kind of use this, but it's not really, are you talking about that? And then I'm thinking well, what do they want to hear and all this stuff? And then they don't give a really good answer. So this is kind of how I found to do it. But it's also something to keep in mind that just because they didn't interview well doesn't mean that they're not good. Self-medication. When I was in college, my college roommate, who was this larger-than-life, great gentleman, was undiagnosed bipolar. My mother was a psychologist for years. She ran substance abuse treatment facilities for years. I did sessions for her in her residence for a long time, so I understand this topic very well. Self-medicating, if you were a bipolar, it's like, okay, alcohol is a depressant. There are other things that are stimulants, like Red Bull, and then there are mood stabilizers like marijuana. And so he had all those things to try to stabilize his mood. When he was up, he drinks more. When he's down, and then stabilize the mood. This percentage of 43% of adults with ADD, and this is from a specific research study, have alcohol disorder. 43%. People self-medicating because they don't know why, or they're on the other side, they just drink a lot of Red Bull. Because you think, why would stimulates make you focus more? Well, because it kind of occupies part of the brain that helps you do that for the things you need to, compared to 10% of the general population. And so this is something that can be a problem, particularly when they're underdiagnosed and they don't know why they were doing it that way. And then I just want to say, because when I started researching this and I found this one, it goes back for years. This is a well-known thing, that there are lots of studies talking about this that we kind of ignored. But I just want to kind of keep this in mind in the people around you. And then there's another element, and these are only two downer slides. I'm sorry, and we'll move on to something more exciting as we kind of close out. It can be trauma-based. Because a lot of the people-pleasing, a lot of the focus, a lot of the reservedness, a lot of these things can also have been identified through childhood trauma, because because there's also wild mood swings and things like that. And so just keep in mind that this could be something as well. And so there's a thing called the ACE test. You can go look it up. It's 12 questions that just kind of say, hey, you okay? And it might be this, particularly if somebody takes ADHD medication and all it does is make their heart race and they don't do anything and it's not helping them. It may not be a chemical, a gene or chemical imbalance. It could be, from trauma. When my brother was in high school, and this was in the late 70s, he and his friends all got speed, because they usually do Quaaludes because that was cool in the 70s, but they got speed one time. And all his friends were like, yeah, man, this is cool. And he's like, I've never been more focused and alert in my entire life. And he didn't get diagnosed with ADHD till he was in his 40s and is much more productive from it. All right, who wants this t-shirt? Works well under pressure, weaknesses, doesn't work any other way. Absolutely they. So the thing when you kind of like, I want to talk a little about trust. When you understand that people are this way and they understand they're this way, when I was in high school, when I did my, I had a term paper, I would plan to do it the night before. Like literally, I'm going to stay up all night before, I'm just going to bang it out, And so if you can trust them, and I'll talk a little about trust in a second, they realize that on any given day, these things can happen, And that's where, when I was working later in life, a friend of mine had bipolar, and I would check in on him every day. I'm like, who are we today? He was like, he's down, he's not doing anything. It's like, great, I will leave you alone. Let me know if you need anything. But if I come in and he's manic, he's like, yeah, we're just like, great, we're going to get a whole bunch done today. All right, let's get this going. And I started organizing, rallying, and aiming them at things and solving problems, and it's great. It's like, whoever you are today, lean into that. Remember the momentum, remember the opportunity, maybe these things. It's like, whatever it is, fine. And I know that in leadership, like I have 3 people, I can't have people that I'm like, how am I going to make, we all need everyone to go forward in the same direction. Fine, make sure they're all this way. And, if you have, a lot of people, fine, I understand this is not a perfect thing, but just to understand and knowing this, like, okay, I have a little empathy for why this is, and I'm not just like, why are they always late? Why don't they understand these things? Why can't I get them? Why aren't they learning about these things? Their mind doesn't work this way. And so they may show up in one of these things and lean into whatever happens to be, but like I said, completed by a deadline. It was like, hey, have you started yet? Nope, yep, but I trust that Janet's going to get it done because she's a perfectionist, is going to get it done. And it's just like she hasn't hit the right stride or have the right motivating things to make that happen. Fine. I don't care how it's done. And that's the problem that we also get a lot is like, back in 2000, I was in a little startup for wireless routing protocols, blah, blah, blah. And one of the angel investors sat down with all of us, it's like, what's your goal? It's like, well, I want to make this thing work and blah, blah. What's your goal? I want to make a lot of money. What's your goal? It's like, do you care how I get you there? No? Great, we can work together. It's when people start saying, okay, I want you to do this, but do it this way, do it this way, do it this way. It's like, okay, now I'm out. So if you let them to his vices and you trust him, then that's the thing. So everyone's probably seen that. Well, I'll tell the story first, and then I'll talk about that. In 2002, when I was hiring ethical hackers, I did not expect anyone to have ever done it. Fair enough. It's new enough. We're doing it back before it was cool. And so I get resumes, stack of resumes, because I told HR, give me every resume. Like 50 resumes going through it, and all of them were like administrators, Unix administrator, network admin, Windows admin, whatever. And I look, and it's like, okay, fine. And I finally get to a guy. And it was like previous experience, sword fisherman, Gloucester, Massachusetts, 1986 to 87. All right, some of you reacted. Do you know why? You all want to talk to him, right? You don't know why, but you know. And that's what I did. Like, I want to talk to this guy. And she's like, why him? It's like, did you see that? You ever watch A Perfect Storm? I wouldn't get on that boat. This person's up for anything. But now I know the secret. The real word is trust. I trust this dude. And you probably have seen that video. Is it Simon Sinek, the Navy SEAL, trust over performance? It's like Navy SEAL Team 6, high trust, medium performance over low trust, high performance. It was like, because I don't care if you're the best shot. I want to trust you're going to get us out alive. That's all I care about. I can figure the rest of it out. And so that was the thing that now I can articulate when I saw this guy. And I've said this story in a number of podcasts. I'm waiting for him to reach out. I was the guy who worked for EDS in 2002, that you talk about. We lost him out to Booz Allen. So I didn't get him. But anyway, so but it's because of trust. And so sometimes when you kind of have these like, listen, they're a little nutty. They're not consistent in how they do things normally, but I trust that they're going to get us out alive and we're going to get it done no matter what. And it may not be a normal way, but I trust them. And so when you kind of get into that, once you have that trust with them, they may show up this way, they may show up that way, they may show up that way, but I guarantee you it'll get done. And it may be meticulous and perfect, or it may be, sloppy and rushed. But know what you're dealing with before that. And that's like the secret of it, is knowing where you stand. And I know you may have a lot of people and you can't get to know them personally, but maybe it would help to like, okay, what are their quirks? What are the things? How do they work best? Who do they work best with? Because remember I said at the beginning when I was being a dishwasher, it's like when I was with my people who accepted me and did not judge me and were the same, I was productive as hell. And so, we have great sense of humor. We do things a little notice. Like, the four of us are on the panel this afternoon. We're still figuring out what we're going to do. It's like, we'll work it out. But we're going to work it out because we can do things with little things. We're very loyal friends. That's why I'm the social coordinator, for the city. And having friends is important. Having your community is important for boosting self-esteem, helping with the brain, particularly people who get you. Again, I didn't start, being really chatty until my friend who was like me was in the room, because nobody else, they were all neurotypical and they weren't quite sure what to make of me. But when I got to my friend, I'm able to do this. And so I get lots of dopamine hits by being around my friends. And that's that's the thing. Whoops, I'm supposed to not be near the speaker. All right, because our friends get our quirks, and, and my favorite neuroscientist, Rachel Summers, who's Dr. Rachel Summers up in Canada, she talks, this is from one of her ADHD publications. She has, they literally change your brain. It's like when you have friends with that, area of the brain that talks about, social cognition actually improves, gets stronger by having friendships. So, even though this person or you or your spouse or your kids is it feels isolated, it is real important to find that community of weirdos that are just like us to be able to be part of that. And that is going to really help in a lot of things. Here's just last thing. Like I said, our goal is to make people productive, reduce distractions, don't be hard when they fail. Remember, this is not a treatable condition. This is how the brain's wired, and they're not going to, prevent them from being left-handed. And then it's all about how to motivate them. So with that, I thank you very much for your attention. And so if we have any questions, so I have 10 minutes. Great. Let's talk about this. We have a microphone. We're being live streamed, so you can hear out. Me just calling it back is not going to help as much. So, and also, I'm around all day. When I did this smaller, shorter version of this at the Secure World event and in the spring, I sat outside for 2 hours talking to people. So hopefully this resonated well. Hopefully this is beneficial. But yeah, happy to answer any questions that you may have on the topic or on anything. And I'm so happy not have to talk about cloud security or, all these other things. Oh, no, okay, I thought you were going to somebody. Oh, so you walked all the way over there and the person's over here. So that's one of the games that we'll probably do is okay, let's make him run around. I'm going to have a question, but I'm going to wait till he's over there and then I'm going to say.
So
yes.
I want to go back and touch on the 90-second thing you said. So, I think I just realized that my daughter is neurodivergent, because she would start working on something, she would, this stupid thing and other stuff, and we say, hey, stop doing that. It's not pleasant to be around. But she just keeps going on, and no matter how much we talk to her, it's like she can't get out of it. So you say 90 seconds, give them that, and then try redirecting?
Right. Yeah, because obviously she's spinning up because she's thinking about that, and then all the anxiety things kicking in and all the self-doubt kicking in and all the things that are going wrong because I don't do this. It's kicking in. I'm going to fail. I'm not going to get this done. And so it's just let it kind of run through the first thing. It's okay, let me de-escalate and redirect after that. Because if you start hitting first, then, and again, I'm not a PhD doctor. This is what I've seen and what I've actually used with my staff over the years and my sons to help us let it go. And also giving them that space to say, it's okay. Isn't hockey they let them fight for a bit? And it's they fight and it's okay, that's enough. It's let's get it out of them, wear them out a little bit, and then they'll be ready to go. Let them wear themselves out and then de-escalate and redirect. Noah? Over here.
So right, as you know, one of the major topics we all get is how to communicate with the board.
Yes.
Being that cybersecurity has a lot of neurodivergence in it, I'd like to hear you opine on how to facilitate some of that communication, what you think that impact is, right? Within our teams, it's super easy. We all get each other, right? But then when you got to take what you've done or what happened and explain that in a logical kind of fashion to the CEO, CFO, and board?
Absolutely. I actually have a keynote on that specific topic, and we talk about that on our panel even later today. But yes, it is either find the person who knows how to do that very well on the team, or you're going to really have to kind of practice, because remember that they may be similarly, but in different ways. And so what I talk about in my keynote about talking to boards is understand them as humans. So the same thing as you're managing down, manage up the same way. When I talked about my friend who I worked with, it was bipolar, he was my boss. And so it's like, I'm here to make you successful. And it's like, what do you like to hear and what way you like it to hear? You like numbers, you like this, you like that, you want me to tell a story, you want me, I had a CEO that was absolutely ADHD, and we'd have these 5-minute stand-ups. I'd go in his office like, hey, here are the things you need to know. It's like, hey, here's what I need to know. Great, good meeting, let's get out. Because if you already know the patterns, like, I don't need to explain it. Just say, these are the key things, you get it. So I would say learn the board and kind of what their quirks are and what they want to see to help kind of tailor that. Because it may not be the clash of like, yes, when I was a virtual CISO, I had people trying to give like 40-page PowerPoints to the board about what versions of Oracle and crap there. I'm like, no. Think of them as all being ADHD and just get right to the facts so quickly. If they have anything, go. So maybe trying to lean into the advantage of that. Like, I'm just going to give you the top level facts. You either figure it out on your own or you'll ask me and I'll be happy to explain. Someone over here had a question? Yeah. Mm-hmm. I know you've all eaten, so it's not like I'm holding up from lunch. Those dessert coming out? Am I holding up from dessert? Anyway, I know there'll probably be other. Yes.
Hey, good afternoon. You mentioned different people showing up at different times and capitalizing on that. In my limited research, I saw a term called chronotypes. I was going to see if you thought that was a real thing. And then forgive me, it's a two-part question. So not everybody can show up right from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. if that's how their mind wants to work. So how do you leverage time management in those situations to sort of fit a round peg in a square hole?
Right. It's kind of like unfortunately, the reality is like, make sure you don't pick a round peg, if you need someone to be there all day. And because there's plenty of other people there's other places that don't care. There's 2 million open cybersecurity positions if we're just talking cybersecurity examiners, because you're just going to make them miserable and they're not going to be as effective, and then you're going to be mad at all the time because they're always going to be late. But and then there's something, if that is you, of like, okay, what can I compromise and say, I'll come in at noon and I will make sure I kind of do a little bit of that. But again, thinking about managing energy over the time or the resources, just say, okay, what can we sit down with and say, what are we willing to negotiate about how that would best work? And are things that you can do like time? And maybe it's like changing to a different role that doesn't really matter. But that's also something, and I know it's two sides things, and we can't like treat everybody as like their own special snowflake, but it's absolutely, there's got to be some negotiation in there.
That works great in the SOC too.
Yeah, like SOC work. We have people in our company, right? They're like, don't want to not work third shift or fourth shift, whatever the night shift. It's like, hey, I want to still work night shift. So, sorry for the cough there in the thing. Yes, we have a question right here. I may have to get Debbie's fan.
You mentioned how HR departments can sometimes be a difficulty when trying to acquire talent. Do you have any tips or advice for people to how to navigate this with their HR departments?
Yeah, educate them. I mean, something all of us struggle. Noah and I were talking about that recently. Educate them on like what is unique. It's like, I know that you have a category. I know these labor things required. I know this stuff, but honestly, these people are a little different than your average accountant or neurotypical type of role. And so, like, help them understand why that you want to see every resume and don't filter. And I don't care they don't have a certification because somebody 5 years ago said that's a requirement for the job. And help with the creation of the job descriptions if you have the ability to do that. Last time I was hiring people, I put it up on Ninja Jobs and I'm like, hey, did you do this? It was like, and make it enticing for them to want to do that. And just kind of work with them to see, hey, here are my challenges with it. And your mileage may vary, because there might be certain categories, particularly if you do contracting work, to get certain levels, to get certain things. And, but keep in mind, it's like you're going to lose out to the best people who don't have that restriction. And that's what I kind of tell them. It was like, yeah, great. You want them to show up and wear a tie every day. It's like, well, the other people don't care about that. And if you want the best people, then we need to be a little flexible. There's a question over here. Yes. Hi.
Hi, Rick. So as a member of the community, which you've just described, thank you so much for giving a voice to those who either don't know or may have others in their life who may be a part of that community, don't know. So thank you again for giving a voice. I appreciated
You're welcome.
the conversation we were able to have after Secure World. And I see a couple of other people who were there, and just being able to share those experiences, find our community, find other people like us, and make our brains happier and better. So when neurodivergent people are looking for their next role, and they want to find those managers, they want to find those leaders who are receptive to managing neurodivergent folks, how do they find them? Where are they? Are they all on your podcast? How do we locate them, right? Because that's been a challenge for me, and I'm sure it's been a challenge for other neurodivergent folks. And then it's like, oh, well, if you can connect with other neurodivergent folks, and you can say, oh, well, where do you work, and are you happy, and oh, your manager's cool, oh, you have more flexibility to do whatever, you have the ability to achieve flow. How do we find those people?
It's not going to be easy. I mean, that's why I'm the cruise director here. It's kind of like bringing people together. And hopefully now we have 200 leaders who now will understand this more, and more that are on the live stream, and more that will watch the video afterwards. And that's why I am trying to socialize as much as possible, and that the SANS Institute have done it, and CyberMinds do it. I'm going to be on a podcast next month on this topic. And so like the more that we can explore, because you're right, it's like in identifying that and kind of educating them. But otherwise, it's what you just said, as you figured out in the pattern. It's like, okay, well, I know that Josh is this way, and we're going to do this thing, and I know this person is this way, and we're going to go. You just have to kind of keep trying until like, okay, I see you don't get me. I'm going to move on. But yeah, it's very difficult. And of course, my phone is ringing in my pocket. But yeah, and I would say that's also kind of why I want to kind of build this community, because you are now exposed to other people who you can now get out and about here in town to be able to kind of see who's cool and who is not. And I know some of my peers, we talk about this all the time, and they're out there. And so maybe, and if you are, then follow up with her afterwards.
And we could be here all day with Q&A. So, but the good news is, well, first of all, thank you, Rick. How about a round of applause for Rick? The good news is Rick is going to be moderating the panel, and the panel is actually